Hello out there, and welcome again to Teamwork Excellence's Brain Trust. As always, these 60-minute summits are here to help you increase your professional and leadership potential, and today is no exception. A big part of that is working on habits and processes we use both as teams, but also the habits and processes we display personally. So today I'm really excited to welcome and invite up to the stage our Senior Associate at Teamwork Excellence, Michael Fiss, who's going to lead today's session. Michael's going to help us through this inbox detox as promised. He's going to help us declutter our channels of communication as they're coming in, better manage what's coming in and assaulting us day in, day out. And believe me, with my life and 3 kids and schools and dance and work and everything coming at us, this is a challenge. He's going to help us win back time. And that's time that we can be spending on other things as we're in a relatively interesting part of the human experience. So Michael Fiss, welcome. So happy to have you doing this with us.
Thank you, Tim.
I don't want to take too much more of the time because we've got some great stuff that we're going to get into. So Michael, I'm just going to go ahead and pass the ball to you. We're going to listen to your presentation, and then I'm going to join you on the back end to have a little bit of a question, and we're going to answer some Q&A. So if you've got questions, make sure to jam them in the chat. Take it away, Michael.
Alrighty. Thanks, Tim. Glad to be here. So I'm going to jump right into the presentation, but before I get too far in, I just want to come up with a little bit of it's not really a disclaimer, but some context here. So this is a presentation I've been doing for a few years now. And what I'm presenting is sort of a synthesis of Getting Things Done by David Allen. So this book here, Getting Things Done, New York Times bestseller. Inbox Zero, which was popularized by Merlin Mann, and a few Outlook courses I've taken over the years. And that's all merged with my own personal and professional experience. So it is important to note that this is a subjective area. There are best practices, and it could challenge some of your assumptions. So it's only fair that if I'm challenging your assumptions, you feel free to challenge me and ask questions in the chat, and we'll cover them either during the presentation or after the presentation during the Q&A. So jumping in, I just wanted to share a quick little video that this is what I think of when I think of email overload. So we'll just...
Joel Miller, you just found the marble in the oatmeal. You're a lucky, lucky, lucky little boy, because you know why? You get to drink from the fire hose! Okay, you ready? Open wide!
You get to drink from the fire hose. That somewhat feels like what email feels like sometimes, or trying to find the marble in the oatmeal where we have so much noise and so little signal. So I was a very young Michael Richards in the Weird Al Yankovic film UHF, well before his self-inflicted fall from grace. But that's the drinking from the fire hose is the metaphor that I think of. So before we get too far into the presentation, I just wanted to start with a little bit of a breath. Right? And to focus and provide context on what we're talking about today. So you can't control what you receive. And we're receiving through lots of different mediums. We receive text messages and phone calls and voicemails and emails. All that stuff is coming at us all the time. So you can't control what you receive, but you can control how you respond to it. Your thought patterns, your habits, the tools you use. And so it's important to recognize what we can influence versus what we can control. What we can influence are systems and cultures and practices, but we can't change them. So fundamentally addressing the problem of digital overload at work or in personal life requires a bit of a radical reflection societally or organizationally on how we use communication and how an organization's culture helps or hurts that communication. So since COVID started, we've all experienced a loss of control. We are all... we talk about FOMO, or the fear of missing out. And right now, we're not just experiencing the fear of missing out. We are missing out. We are missing out on how life is supposed to be. And so that can cause a loss of control. It can cause anxiety. It can cause feelings of self-victimization. And I want to say there's just absolutely no shame in feeling how you feel. And I'm not here to tell you you're doing it wrong or you should be doing better. What I do want to do is give you some thoughts and some tools that might help you regain power and control and strength. over your communication, over the incoming communication and the outgoing communication that you send and receive. So David Allen is kind of the juggernaut in this space. Getting things done is kind of the 800-pound gorilla in the room. His quote here is, "Your mind is for having ideas, not holding them." And it seems like a really simple thought, but it's a really, 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 really important one. In GTD, and I'm not, this is not a presentation on getting things done. I'm not, preaching that particular methodology. But I think David Allen has some really important thoughts in this space. And he talks about how you have a number of in trays, ways you receive things, physical mailboxes, in trays on your desk. You have personal and professional email inboxes. You have text messages, WhatsApp, Signal, Facebook Messenger, Telegram, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook stories, you name it. All this stuff is coming at you all the time. And so those are what he would call in trays. And they feed you open loops, things that are not handled necessarily. Some things are for information, some things are for action. But until you assess and decide what they are, they're open loops that you need to decide how to close. And his single most important belief here is that you need to have a trusted system. And so to give you an example from my past, when I was a younger man, when I was in high school or university, I didn't have as many appointments as I do now. And so I used to just commit to memory upcoming doctors or dentist appointments. And I would know that such and such a date at such and such a time was my next appointment. Predictably, that stopped working. And it stopped working when I started to miss appointments. And so that system was not a system, nor was it ultimately trusted. And so it's important to try to develop your systems to a point where they don't just suddenly stop working. And the trust is a really, really important piece of your system, is you have to trust it. It has to remind you, you have to be able to act on it. You can't be missing things or it's not trusted. So with that, I wanted to talk about wildfire season. We're headed into wildfire season in North America. And it is really, really easy to find pictures of aircraft dumping water on wildfires. It is really easy to find pictures of fire crews walking through the flames. It is virtually impossible to find pictures of fire prevention. It's not sexy. It's not exciting. Crises and dramatics and heroics are exciting, and they make us feel like heroes. But disciplined execution on a daily, weekly, monthly basis is not exciting. And so it's really important to recognize that in life, as with a wildfire, it's easy to ignore the needs of the forest until it's about to burn down your home. That's a little dramatic, but the point there is, don't let your system reach the point where it starts suddenly failing you. Put in some prevention and some effort. And that brings us to a conversation around Eisenhower and the Eisenhower Matrix. So President Eisenhower, he was giving a speech at a college, and he quoted a former president of that college, and this is the quote that's commonly attributed to him, which is, he has two kinds of problems, urgent and important. The urgent are not important, and the important are never urgent. Stephen Covey later adopted a sort of a similar matrix, looking at the dichotomy of urgent versus important in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And this is what's commonly called the Eisenhower Matrix. Urgent on one axis, important on the other. So when we look at what's important, this is subjective, and this is in the eye of the beholder. So what's important to you in your professional life? What are your values? If you looked at the emails you sent and the meetings you attend and the appointments you held, would your priorities match up with the way you spend your time? Would they match up with the emails you receive and you send, and the text messages and the letters and whatever else you are receiving and sending? Would they match up? It's a good question. So I want to spend just a little bit of time. Some of you may have seen this before. It's a very popular tool, but I want to spend just a little bit of time talking about these quadrants because it's important foundational work. In quadrant 1, we have things that we manage. This is firefighting. This is, dumping water on a wildfire. It's crisis. It's pressing problems. It's deadline-driven issues. However we got here, we need to deal with them now. It's too late for prevention. Quadrant 2, on the other hand, though, is quality time. These are things we want to focus on. This is sharpening the saw in Covey's terms, right? You can't just keep sawing all the time. Your saw will get dull and you'll start getting less effective. You have to spend time to sharpen and maintain your tools. And that's true of physical tools, and that's true of metaphorical tools. And so this is prevention, improvement, building relationships, planning, potentially having leadership offsites or time to reflect and strategize. Quadrant 3 is distractions. We want to limit these. These are interruptions. Most interruptions are urgent, but they're not necessarily important. If your phone rings, you answer it. You might find out that it's the Canada Revenue Agency threatening to arrest you and haul you off to jail, but unless you have a really great spam screener, you might still take that call urgently and then find out it's absolutely not important. Some meetings, some mail, some phone calls fall into this category. And lastly, we have time-wasting activities, and we just want to avoid these altogether. This is trivial work that is busy work, doesn't add value. Some meetings, some mail, some phone calls, again, fall in here. I do want to note, however, that email does not end up in the urgent column, and we're going to come back to that. But there's no emails indicated in the urgent column. So with that out of the way, with looking at what's urgent and what's important, I want to talk about time management. A lot of people want to manage their time. And again, this maybe seems like a simple statement, but you can't really manage time. Time happens around you. What you can manage is your attention. What you can manage are your actions. Elon Musk apparently scheduled his day in 5-minute blocks. That's crazy to me. I'm not there yet. He's a very unique individual, arguably successful in space and automotive industries. 5 minutes seems crazy to me. I'm not there. I don't even want to say yet because I hope I never am. But that's really interesting, 5 minutes at a time, because when we look at multitasking, a lot of research shows us that productivity really takes a hit when we're switching our attention between multiple activities at the same time, or that we really can't. We can only switch our focus between activities. And that it really gives you the opportunity to just screw up more than one thing at the same time. And so switching your focus between tasks is just going to kill your productivity. So what we want to look is how do we manage our actions, not our time? And the first thing that we want to look at is how do we track our actions? And where do we track our actions? It's an important thing to think that about emails and text messages and a lot of the communication we receive in Slack or Microsoft Teams or Zoom meetings are not letters. Emails are not letters. Text messages are not conversations necessarily. In many cases, they're poorly formatted tasks. But they're poorly formatted. So we don't want to necessarily let our inbox be our to-do list. We want to think about how to format this task, how to structure this task so we can actually do it. So that's step one. Your inbox is not a to-do list. If you have 300 messages in your inbox and you're just keeping them in there because you have something to do, let's think about a different way to handle that. Lastly, the next thing is that your mailbox is not a museum. You might think that you're going to stuff all these emails into an archival system and it's going to look like the Smithsonian Institute's collection of butterflies. And instead it rapidly devolves into just shoving things into poke holes wherever they fit. You have a folder for emails from your boss. You have a folder for emails on a project. Your boss emails you about that project. Where do you stuff it? It can become really, really challenging quickly because unlike butterflies, we don't have an entire Linnaean taxonomy developed over hundreds of years to help us categorize our emails. So we don't want to necessarily curate our inbox. One of the first companies I worked at, every email we sent externally, we had to include a code below our signature that would have a filing location. Then the secretary for the entire company, the receptionist rather, would print out those emails in hard copy and file them in physical filing folders. It's 2021. I don't think we need to do that. Let's learn some better ways. So step one, I want you to look at how many emails you have in your inbox, or at least just think about how does it make you feel? Is it a source of stress for you? And if it's a source of stress for you, I would encourage you to give up. Give up strategically. Tactically retreat. If your system is not working, you don't need to beat yourself up for that. Let's find a path forward. But first, I want to declare an email amnesty. We're going to request asylum at the Inbox Zero Embassy. And I want you to think about taking all of those folders in your inbox, your main inbox, however many are read, however many are unread, and just think about selecting all of them and moving them into a new folder that you're going to create. And you can call it whatever you want. You can call it Old Inbox. You can call it Inbox 2. Call it whatever you like. But think about, and I would encourage you to consider moving them outside of your inbox and start with a blank slate, a completely clean inbox. And all we've done is move them. You can still tell yourself that you'll get to them. You can still tell yourself that you'll reply or act on them. But in the meantime, we want to stop the madness, and we're going to try to get our inbox clean. So that's step one, is to surrender. And step two is we're going to look at how we can action these things. Oh no! I'm over here still. These things are annoying and have popped up and completely interrupted my presentation. So maybe we'll take a second to discuss distractions and interruptions that happen within the tools that we're using themselves. And so we'll come back to this diagram here that I'm showing on screen. We'll come back to that and discuss that. But first, I want to talk about sensible defaults. And so in a lot of email systems, we have, when new messages arrive, they play a sound or they change the mouse pointer. Maybe they display a desktop alert or pop something up in the bottom of the screen. In most cases, that's going to take us right out of flow. If we're working on a project for an hour and we're half an hour in and we're just really in the groove, and then suddenly an email pops up and it's not really relevant, we're one of 1,000 copies on it. It's not for our attention or for our action. Just something that we need to know. It's a newsletter or something, right? A monthly newsletter for your department. And it's you want to read it at some point, but you don't necessarily want to be completely taken out of your flow. Let's turn all of this stuff off. Now, there is a risk culturally that if your organization treats emails as the place for urgent things, you could miss stuff. You could miss or learn a little slower than the rest of your peers when the CEO sends a company-wide announcement. You might not receive the immediate instant notification. You have to be okay with that. You have to be okay with the fact that if your boss or your colleagues or your customers send you emails and they're urgent, and that's the way it happens, you have to consider whether this approach is going to be right for you. But I would like to say that, there's a reason we don't email the fire department. We don't say, "Happy Thursday, fire department. Hope you had a great long weekend. Just looping you in on the 5-alarm fire at my house. Please respond at your earliest convenience. Cheers." There's a reason we call or we text, and we can text in many jurisdictions. 911 call if you can, text if you can't. There's a reason those methods are used, and that's because there's an immediate closed loop. You send that notification, you call, you can hear that somebody has received your message, you can hear they're on their way. So for really, really urgent matters, it's not enough to just send an email into the void, urgent, and hope that somebody's sitting at their desk or has their notifications on and receives it. So this is something culturally that you're going to want to look at the system in which you work and say, can we switch to having a different approach for urgent matters and taking those kinds of things off of email, using text, using instant messaging where we can see people's status and we can see their replies and we can see they've received or read a message. But let's take that stuff out of email. And likewise, on the topic of distractions, let's look at the kind of distractions we receive when we have a meeting coming up. And 15 minutes before that meeting, we get a notification, "Hey, you have a meeting in 15 minutes. Is it necessary to be notified 15 minutes? I mean, if you have 4 or 5 meetings in a day or 6 or 7 or 8 or 16, and you're receiving that many notifications 15 minutes before each meeting, you're losing a quarter hour of what could otherwise be, uninterrupted working time or focus time when you maybe only need 5 minutes to walk to the meeting room or to join the Zoom call. So I'd encourage you to turn these off. Or if you're likely to miss meetings, if you don't have those notifications, at least tune them down. The default in Outlook is 15. Try 5 and see how that works for you. But we're really trying to manage what we're allowing to interrupt us here. And in the same way, what should be allowed to hit our inbox? We can create rules. One of the organizations I worked for, we had a Bell telephone conference line. It was before video conferencing. And they would send a summary report of your conference after every meeting you held. And it would say, here's all the phone numbers that dialed in. Here's how long the meeting was. Each line dialed in for 15, 25, 27 minutes. And it didn't really have any purpose. So I just created a rule that when I received an email from noreply@bell.ca, immediately deleted it, with conference summary report in the subject. I also delete accepted meetings. I don't need to know that somebody accepted my meeting. I need to know if they rejected, declined, or accepted it as tentative. Again, these rules are things that you'll want to think about if they're right for you. But the critical thought process here is do I need to see this regularly? Or if I don't, can I manage it some way? Can I send it somewhere else or just delete it directly? Unsubscribing is a similar kind of a thing. Personally, any email that I receive from my son's school at cbe.ab.ca, whether it's his teacher, his principal, the superintendent, I apply a label school to that. Goes to my main inbox. It has a label school. So if I ever need to look up what have I received from Theodore's school, his teachers, whatever, I can always find that label school and see, a couple hundred emails sorted from most recent to oldest. So again, we're just trying to think about how can we set ourselves up for success here. We can't control what we can receive, but we can control how we handle it. And that brings us to an important point is how do we put on our own oxygen mask, but then also help others? And so there's another really short clip that I want to show here, and we'll just jump right into that.
Opening day at the world's first two-story outhouse.
Whoa, God.
Two-story outhouse. So we want to make sure that we're not just dumping things downstream either. And so how do we help with the amount of emails that somebody else is receiving, our colleagues, our customers, our suppliers, our leaders? And so you want to be mindful when you're copying who you copy. You don't necessarily need to reply all. You'll want to consider the subject line you use. Is it just RE forward update? Or is it project status update, May 29th, 2021 on track? When somebody's looking for that email, how likely are they going to be able to find it and recognize what it's about? Can the email be down edited? If we have a month of email chains between 30 people, that email can get quite long. It could even contain information that is sensitive and that people who are now later copied shouldn't even be seeing. So we can consider whether we should down edit or cut some of the context from that email and condense just enough context about the email itself, about the start of the chain, and the most recent context. So those are things we can think about to help our colleagues out. And then when we're receiving emails, there's sort of a couple steps that we can go through. And this would be, how do we convert a poorly formatted task or poorly formatted message into a task? So the first step, this is the graph I showed earlier before I got, drowned by pop-ups, is it actionable? Can I do something with this? If it's spam, it's not actionable. Send it to trash. If it's a really good idea, but it's not strategically imperative right now, or it's something that we can think about for the future, I can file that to some place I keep all my someday. Someday we might do this. It'd be nice. Someday maybe we can do that. And if it's just for information, it's a newsletter or something, I can read it and I can archive it. And we're going to talk about a single archive folder in a bit, but that would be one option we can do. It's an important thing to talk about how we file, because I've said you shouldn't. I'll say should not use a complex filing system. And there's a lot of evidence to support that. This is a picture of Amazon's warehouse. You can see we have cereal, Windex, stuffed animals, and Clorox disinfecting wipes next to each other. There's no logical organization to that approach. It's called literally chaotic storage. And their approach is that they're going to put stuff wherever there is space, because they just need to be really good at finding things. They're not going to keep the Lysol wipes next to the Clorox wipes next to the baby wipes, because people likely aren't going to buy all of those things at the same time. So structuring those things doesn't make sense. If they can say to a picker, go pick up 124D1 and get some Clorox wipes, they can be halfway across the warehouse from anything related. But it doesn't matter, because it doesn't make anything better to have those things together. And so the application for us in email and text messages and other things like that, but primarily email, is to look at how do we get really good at finding things? How do we use the search tools? Gmail for a long time had really, really excellent search tools. Outlook has caught up now. They have advanced search operators. They have a whole bunch of tools you can use right within Outlook to find emails by sender, by date, content within the body, tags that you can apply. And so then you can just get to a habit of filing things to a single archive folder and getting really good at finding them. That's how Gmail does it. You have the archive button within Gmail, just sends it to a single folder, and you can get really good at using their search tools. I'll make a point here too that works really nicely on mobile. If you have email on your mobile device for personal and professional applications, oftentimes you can swipe left or swipe right to delete it or archive it, file it to a folder. And if you're just sending it to a single folder all the time, that becomes really, really easy compared to, trying to navigate this touch screen and say file to this folder in this nested folder structure. It can become a little bit more challenging. So you can use search folders in Outlook where you say every email from a particular sender with a particular topic is going to get filed into this folder that automatically searches for those emails all the time. And so all of my company's newsletters or emails from my CEO will end up in a clickable folder. Those emails in there haven't been moved in there. I haven't had to move them from different places. They're just referenced. They're a link to the content, and that can be a really good way to go. Gmail will let you add labels so that when you receive an email from TWE with our latest great content, you don't miss it, and you can find all of our past issues as well. So we've covered what we do if an email is actionable or not actionable. Rather, we trash it, we move it to someday, or we archive it. The next step is, can it be done in a single action? If not, we're going to want to track that this is a project, and this project has multiple next steps. Can it be done in less than 2 minutes? Let's just do it. If it's less than 2 minutes, just do it. Is it for me? No, then maybe I want to track that I'm waiting on somebody to do this. And it's important that we know people are counting on our commitments, and we want to make sure that we are tracking what people owe us as well. Not with a gotcha mentality, but just to be able to follow up and renegotiate if needed. And then lastly, if it's not soon, then we can make it into a next action using whatever task list or structure we like. If it's Post-its on a Kanban board, if it's a to-do list written on a notepad or a whiteboard, if it's the task list in Outlook or Google Tasks, however you want to do that, have a trusted system for tracking your next actions. And lastly, if you want to, you can always just book a meeting, right? You can say, I've received your email. Let's chat about it. I'll book a meeting and we'll chat about it there. It's a discussion item. But you're going to want to be careful about what you use your calendar for. You don't want to just necessarily block time for working on particular activities. You do want to reserve working time and use it in accordance with your trusted system, because priorities change. And if you're blocking time to specifically work on one item, unless it's really urgent, something else could trump it, could take priority. And you're going to want to be able to be flexible there. And so the best practice with a lot of email and a lot of communication is to handle once. And a single archive folder really, really helps with that. Gmail, which I'm showing up in the top here, has the archive button and has add to tasks that lets you look at an email and say, I don't need to do anything with this. I'm going to archive it, or I'm going to add it to my tasks right away. And then when you reply, one of the buttons you can turn on, you have to turn this on, but you can Google how to do that under Google Gmail Send and Archive, is that Send plus Archive button. And so as soon as you reply to an email and hit Send and Archive, it'll archive the original email and it's handled as well. And so it saves you sort of the 2 steps of reply and then go back and find the original email you replied to and handle that. You can do a similar thing in Outlook, which is the bottom image here with quick steps. And so I created a couple actions for emails. Done, which just archived it. Reply and done, which is the same thing as send and archive from Gmail. Create a couple tasks and then file the original email as done, or create a meeting and file the original email as done. So to just give you a sense of how that would look, you can Google how to do this relatively easy. It's a quick step, quick action. Is when I hit the reply and done, or Shift F2 is the shortcut I made it. You can reply, move to archive, mark it as complete, mark it as read. That email's done. You've opened up the reply. You hit send, completely put to bed. And a similar thing you can do for tasks, where you're just creating a task, marking the original email as complete, moving it to your archive folder, and marking it as read. Next, I want to talk about what a next step looks like. What does a next action look like? And so I'm going to talk about what's called temporal motivation theory. And so this is a theory from Dr. Peter Steele, and he created the procrastination equation. I was an undergrad at University of Calgary when he was writing his book on procrastination, and he's finished it now, which is good. That's a terrible joke. But anyway, this is his equation: is motivation equals expectancy times value over impulsiveness times delay. Expectancy is how strongly you believe you're going to be able to complete a task, your confidence, how difficult it is. Value is the reward you get for completing it, as well as how unpleasant or pleasant it is to do it. Impulsiveness is your intrinsic susceptibility to distractions and impulsivity, and delay is how far in the future something is. And so there's a real big benefit to chunking things out, to making big things into smaller tasks. And I'm going to show how that works in a little bit, right? So if we take a big project and we break it into subtasks, we can increase the expectancy. We can take the expectancy and make it bigger because we're more likely to complete that task. but the task itself is smaller. So we don't get quite as much value. And it takes, we get it sooner. So delay decreases. So value decreases slightly, but delay decreases substantially, and impulsiveness hasn't changed. So what we can see is that we've increased the numerator, decreased the denominator, and therefore our motivation has increased. So that's a way to think about is breaking out large tasks into smaller tasks makes it easier to do the next step and the next step after that. And it's kind of cliched, but it really is sort of visualizing one small domino knocking over the next, knocking over the next, knocking over the next, and helping us get that momentum to finish the big piece of work by completing the smaller tasks. And so here's what you can do today. You can think about how do you get a single in tray? How do you collect all the stuff you're receiving and put it in one place? It can be physical, it can be digital, but how do you get all of those things that are coming at you, your next steps, your actions, things you want to put in your reading list, how do you get those all into one sort of trusted system? How do you empty your mind to in as soon as possible? When someone tells you, don't forget about this birthday coming up, do you just remember it? Or is there some way that you can put that into your calendar or your task list or somewhere else that you're going to remember it? How do you handle once? So don't read the email, mark it as unread, leave it in your inbox, and come back to it a week later. How do you read it, say, I can do this in 2 minutes and just do it? It's a project. I need to create a project for it. I'm going to create a meeting for it. I'm going to create a task for it. How do you handle it once? Doesn't mean you have to do it. Just means you have a way to track what you need to do. You want to use verbed next actions. So again, if somebody says, don't forget about that birthday, your action doesn't want to be birthday. You don't want your action to be birthday. You want it to be find a present, buy a present, right? A verb, buy a present, or get a card, or send a Facebook message or something, right? Use and edit good email subjects so that people know what you're talking about, and when they're looking for that email later, they can find it. Consider who you copy, whether they need to receive it, who you put in the to line for the direct information versus who you carbon copy, to for the direct action and carbon copy for information. And if it's urgent, strongly encourage you to pick up the phone or ping on instant messenger or text or some form of immediate two-way notification. And then lastly, work in your system, not on it. It's important to adjust your system. It's important to continuously improve. I'm the first person to say continuous improvement is a really important goal, but you don't want to tweak it endlessly to the point where your habit can never actually form. And so you don't want to be too dogmatic about this, right? So I try to live by a philosophy of inbox zero. Inbox zero, you would think, says you have 0 emails in your inbox. I don't sort of go that extreme. I've decided for me that inbox zero means no more than a page. I don't have to scroll in my email program. No more than a page of emails, and none of them can be more than a week old. And that allows me to keep track of the most active, dynamic conversations. If I send somebody an email and they reply back within 2 hours, I don't want to already have moved that I'm waiting for the reply over somewhere else, and then they reply back within 5 minutes, and then I've got to go back and update that. So, think about how your system is working for you, and don't get too dogmatic, but try it for a little bit before you tweak it too much. And that's important to reflect and iterate and improve. So have some time, schedule some time in getting things done. David Allen suggests Friday at 1. That may or may not work for you. He suggests that time so you can clear your head for the weekend and close things off your plate. But it's important to look at, are things working for you? What are you allowing to interrupt yourself? Are your critical actions getting done? Are you able to renegotiate the things that you can't get done? And that brings us to a thought from, it's from Oprah, but Brene Brown relays it in her book, Braving the Wilderness. And her advice from Oprah was, do not think you can be brave with your life and your work and never disappoint anyone. It doesn't work that way. So I had a colleague who talked about, when I would ask him how his day was going, he said, well, I'm going to have to decide who I'm going to disappoint today. And when you decide who you're going to disappoint today, you have choice. You have control. So you can call someone up and you can say, hey, I'm going to have to renegotiate that commitment that I promised you. Something else has come up and it's a higher priority. And that is vastly preferable to just missing the deadline. Whoosh, there it goes. No show, no call, just didn't give you what you needed. So it's important to be strategic and have a trusted system that will let you know who you're disappointing and choose who you're disappointing and be strategic about that. And when you think about your life, and this is going to put kind of a fine point on things, right? But when you think about your life, you likely don't want it to say, your tombstone to say, here lies Michael. He handled 250 emails a day, kept his inbox to less than 1 page of emails, and none of them were more than a week old. That doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. So I would encourage you to check your calendars, check your inbox, look at those things for the past couple of weeks. Are you spending the time on the things that are most important to you personally and professionally? Are the things that are coming into your inbox helping you? And if they're not, then let's all be really intentional about how we're going to change that, how we're going to change what we see, what we handle, how we receive it, perhaps even have conversations about with who's sending it to us. And so that's the conclusion of the formal part of the presentation. Thank you very much for listening. There's my nerdy Vulcan salute, live long and prosper. And with that, I'll invite Tim to come back, and we'll go to some questions from the group.
Great job, Michael. Thank you so much for taking us through that. I know that this was really meaningful for me, and I'm a far away from perfect. I mean, it's not going to read that I anything on my tombstone about managing my inbox properly yet, but I'm a work in progress. So hooray. As you said, anybody who's on the chat, please feel free to drop a question in there. We do have some that have come up over conversation over the last couple of weeks, and that's what I'll start with. As we were trialing this idea as something to pitch out there, I want to get into that right away. So the one that comes to mind for me, and it was sort of reflected in some of the comments in the chat, is let's say that now we are able to control a little more of what's coming, what we're seeing. We're able to filter a little bit better. We're able to really refine what those channels are that are getting to us. How, if we're thinking of this in a community basis or an organizational basis, how can we motivate other people to perhaps stop the flow before it starts? And there were some comments in chat about, this can be coming from suppliers, or this can be coming from coworkers. So what would your suggestion be to really help others consider what they send?
I think it's important to be strategic about it, right? So if 90% of your emails are from some automated system, you're using Oracle, and your supply chain module in Oracle is sending you tons and tons of automated notifications every day. That might be where you want to look at it. If you are instead working with vendors and they're sending you the bulk of the information you receive within a day, you're going to want to look at that. If the bulk of the emails you receive are from your boss or from your peers, you're going to want to look at those things. And so have those conversations and try to set those norms. Obviously, it's way easier to have those conversations with your peers and with your immediate team than it is with your entire organization or with people external. But you can look at what are some systems and approaches that we could set together as norms for within our team. What is the response, the expected response for an email? David Allen's own organization says 2 days, 2 business days is the response service level for an email. And so if you want a response sooner than that, don't send an email. Being able to set those norms as a team can be really, really helpful. And so being able to talk about, are we using clear descriptive subject lines? Are we making sure that something is clear, whether it's for information or for action? Are we using the to field for people who need to do something and the CC field for people who only need to know something? If we're able to come up with those norms, and there's no training when we enter the workforce, here's how to use email well. But if we're able to develop those norms and adopt those best practices together, that can make a difference, right? And that's where we're talking more the sphere of influence. What can I influence versus what can I control? I can control what I do with what I receive, but I can control what I receive. So I can influence others to change how we receive things.
And when we look at, we've got so many more options now in terms of the mediums that we can use to communicate. And it's always curious to me when somebody is resistant to try one of those new mediums, what's the real source of that resistance? Why do they want to perhaps stay away from something? I know if they're working with me, it might be because there's way too much access. But
well, the trick is there's no technology sort of magic bullet here, right? So just by switching to a different tool, you don't necessarily solve the problem, you just create new ones. And so it's important to be strategic about just how do we want to communicate, and is that working? Is it working well? Is it meeting our needs?
Great. Another question that we had that I thought was interesting was you had talked about making adjustments to how you are maybe it's the actual tool itself, the file types you're using, these kind of things, but also your personal process. And you warned against endlessly tweaking that. If a person was going to adopt something like this, can you talk a little bit about how long should they be letting something soak? How long should they be giving it a chance to work?
It depends on the size and the scale of the change. I think it's good to have a weekly review. I would say probably at least have a weekly review and maybe tweak minor things, but don't tweak too many big things between those weekly reviews. But if you're brand new to trying to get a handle on your inbox, step one, as I said, would be to get everything out of your inbox somewhere else. And it's not deleted, it's not gone, it's just somewhere else. And then to be really just sort of conscious of what you're receiving. You don't even need to do anything, but just track as you're receiving things. How helpful is it for you, what you're receiving, and the frequency with which you're receiving it, and how often it's interrupting you, and how often your pocket is buzzing, or you have notifications popping up on your screen, or something's dinging. You don't even know what it is, but you're just hearing dings constantly all day. Something's dinging, 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 dinging. That's really sort of step one, is just to sort of look at this at the current state and get a sense of that really intentionally. As far as tweaking, it's hard to say, right? I would say that the goal here is that you're not creating so much change for yourself that the habit can never form. And so if you're able to build habits, it's not sort of tweaking to your own detriment. But if you're changing your approach and your practices and your tools and your techniques so often that you can't ever actually get into a rhythm and a routine of just autopiloting through this stuff, then you're changing too much.
Yeah, that's a really important thing is to build this into some sort of a larger effort to, why are you doing it? Why is it important to win that time back? One point about being able to measure it, I know something that I've taken to using on the iPhone and actually helping my kids use on the iPhone so that we can take a look at it, is just paying attention to how often the phone is picked up and why it's picked up. What's the app that's opened at that time? And I'm not sure what's on Android, but if there's the ability to sort of take a look at, especially around these communication apps, what am I devoting my time to? And often it starts to reflect like, yikes, that's a major distraction for me.
It's really important to be strategic about what do we allow to interrupt us. Because we can choose to be distracted or not, right? We can choose to say, I'm going to be focused on this, but then, I want to see what's going on in the world today. And so I open up news or something, right? That's a choice that we can make. That comes down to self-discipline. That comes down to our control over ourselves. But if my phone starts buzzing, or those dings start going off on our desktop, those are things that we want to be really strategic about, what we allow to interrupt ourselves. And so I would encourage people to think about how many apps or devices do you want to allow to have that control over your attention. A phone call is probably one of them. You can still turn off Do Not Disturb. I've turned off Do Not Disturb right now while we're in this call. So anybody who calls me is going to go right to voicemail, and that's a choice. But what else can we do to say, okay, I'm going to allow this particular text message app, the SMS app on my phone, to vibrate. I'm going to allow emails from my boss that are marked urgent or important to bypass my filters and make a ding or something, right? And to be strategic about that.
I mean, it's getting harder too, because we've got everything from social movements such as the what was it again? I'm trying to remember. I'm blanking on the name of the movie, but really, the Social Dilemma. We've got how much time are we devoting to social media and communication and everything, which is a good segue into another sort of point that we're dealing with. And that is, we're in a period in time right now where many of us have been working from home, and electronic and digital communication has just been ramped up. And at the same time, I think there's been a recognition that there might be too much in one channel, but then we have a proliferation of all these different channels that are coming up. So my question that I'd like you to sort of reflect on for us is, can we expect a reduction as we return to the office now, as life sort of normalizes and we see increased vaccinations, et cetera? And are things going to get back to normal, or is the genie out of the bottle here?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say, right? I don't think we're going to get back to how things were 15 months ago. I think that's not going to happen. So I think
tap into your inner futurist here, Michael. Just take it.
Sure. I mean, I think we're likely to see people continue to work remotely more often than they ever did before, because we've proven that it can be done. And so I think there's going to be important questions about how do we do that effectively when people are working all at home, or some of the time at home and some of the time in the office, with people who are in the same city or in the same region or not. Right? I think that's going to continue to be a really important conversation. We're not necessarily paving the trail there globally in the past 15 months. Certainly there's been organizations that have had remote workers and have done a really great job of that. The difference is the scale of the challenge now. And so I think we're likely to see some higher quality research. We're going to see some higher quality best practices come out of this sort of global experiment with wide scale work from home. But I don't know how that will play out in terms of adoption of tools. I think we're going to run into the same challenge. Is there's no rules for how email is used. There's the defaults that Outlook comes with. There's the defaults that Gmail comes with. There's the defaults that Hotmail or Live Mail come with. Those sort of inform how we collectively use email, but there's no written handbook. And so again, it's kind of up to us to create those guidelines for when do we, if we use, as we do at TWU, if we use Zoom and Slack and Trello and Gmail, what do we put on Slack versus a text versus, right? Those are sort of norms that have to be developed within an organization. So if you go to David Allen's website, getting things done, he has a best practices for teams document that you can find and use it as a starting point for how you develop those norms around email. But around all the other tools, and when do you use one versus the other? Again, that's tricky. There's no standard. So we have to create it ourselves.
And as recently as this week, I was in a workshop with an IT provider, IT department, and they were saying how, people have been using all of these different tools because they were making up for shortfalls, say in the Microsoft Office suite, that it didn't have the functionality that people wanted. And that's the case that we're in. I mean, we use a lot of different apps that meet our needs. And now there's this kind of reinvigoration to sort of re-centralize and be using Teams or be using a centralized system. But then we're going to get, the pendulum's going to swing the other way. And now suddenly we're going to have, a homogenous form of communication that isn't perhaps the most appropriate way to get to people. And so it's like this tension with, let's just find something that's simple and singular. And it probably isn't a tool for all seasons sort of problem. So what I got from that last statement too was that the tool, though, really doesn't matter. And we're going to have to be dealing with this just as part of the human condition. So maybe if we bring this really in to the individual experience here, what would you say are sort of the triggers we can pay attention to, the emotions or the habits that we can get fluent in, that we can see cropping up, that tells us it's time to re-engage in this practice of controlling the flow?
Yep.
What are some of the indicators that I could use?
I mean, they're generally negative emotions for saying you need to make a change, right? So it's frustration, it's stress, it's despair, right? It's you're working on something, you're really into it, and something goes off and you're sucked out of flow and you're just like, and you get frustrated and you think, okay, that was not good timing on that notification. And so it's then a time for self-reflection and to say, okay, well, what isn't working? Do I need to be better about saying, look, team, I'm going to be heads down on this stuff. I'm going to set some do not disturbs on different applications, and I'm just going to, plow through and focus on this stuff. Is one thing you can pay attention to. Do you feel like you're dropping things, that you're missing out on your commitments? That's a signal to pay attention to and say, okay, do I have a trusted system, and how do I make a system, and how do I make sure it's trustable, trustworthy? So it's again, just being, I think I don't know if it was HBR or Fast Company recently had an article about how leaders want to be more strategic. They know they need to be more strategic, but they don't find time to do it. And so in a way, it's important to find time to make sure that your system for managing your actions is working well, is effective.
Important, but not urgent. The only quadrant that pays
quadrant
dividends.
2. Yeah, it's really quadrant 2. And so you need to spend some time looking at your own practices for managing your own actions and your own attention and saying, is it working? And it's working based on, am I achieving the things that I want to achieve? Am I operating in a way that is consistent with my values for follow through and commitment? And looking at things that way.
And procrastinating on that isn't really helpful. And we get back into that equation, which I really liked, because it forms a framework by which we can sort of consider, why are we not moving away from something? You mentioned that, it's frustrating and it's full of despair to break the flow that you're in, or perhaps be distracted. The other half of that equation, though, is that people, in my experience, anecdotally here, when people look at their inboxes and they might be out of control, or people might be unreachable, or they might just be living with having to go through this, the fact that they're even in that state is a source of shame and guilt. And it's kind of embarrassing, and it's hard to look at, because it actually requires we reflect on perhaps what we might not be so good about. And I'm going to just plug you for a minute here, because when you first took me through this process, that was probably the most meaningful thing for me, was the fact that although I'm a big fan of getting it done, and I remember reading the email manifesto and all of these things that were out there, they involved this kind of wholesale commitment to being, hyper organized in one way or another. And that's just not me. I am way too random for that. I have to have rigor, but that's just not who I am. And so the ability to say, guess what? It's 2021. These books were written 10 plus years ago, and the tools are better now. This organized chaos,
the tools are different now. The tools are different.
Okay, good challenge. Love that. They are not necessarily better, because they come with their own risks, for sure. Well, I guess I want to hit one last point that was brought up early in the comments, and that was around, one of the things that people were experiencing when they were a bottleneck in the process of communication was approvals. And you and I have dealt with this, over and over again, where you have a requirement, especially in a large corporation, where that decision has to hit 10, 20, 30 desks before it can be made.
Right.
And it seems to just be, efficiency molasses. So when it comes down to something like that, just in the closing thought, if you were to give a piece of free advice into the room, how could we avoid that?
Well, the fundamental challenge there isn't one of email or communication methods. It's what is the process to get things approved, and how many people need to approve it. So that's a conversation maybe for a different brain trust, is around how do approvals help or hinder processes, and how do approvals help or hinder autonomy, independence, and someone's self-sufficiency. Because there's a lot of research to say that when you send something for approval, the person sending it for approval is maybe less diligent, not consciously, but in some ways unconsciously, because they know somebody else is going to be looking at it. And so you can kind of end up with a self-fulfilling prophecy that the approvers notice errors that maybe otherwise wouldn't have existed if they weren't actually approving it. And so you can kind of sort of self-perpetuate that cycle in that way. That's a short answer to a complicated topic. The other thing I'll say is that just lastly, I want to encourage people, right? this is like starting a new habit. This is a New Year's resolution. This is a decision. I'm going to exercise more. I'm going to eat right, or I'm going to, whatever, hydrate better. Like you will fall off the wagon with trying to better manage your inbox. And so the goal here isn't to have some really rigorous, oppressive, bureaucratic structure. It's to help yourself with as lightweight a structure as you need to feel that you trust your system. And to have tools that when stuff gets out of control, you can bring it back into control. You can declare that email amnesty 3 times a year if you want, and move things out of there. But continue looking at how you can make these things better. And it started with some foundational philosophy, getting intentional about examining the current state, and then saying, is this where I want to be? And leaving yourself some time and some room and some space to think about and work on your own practices for managing your next steps.
Yeah, I mean, I love all of that, and I think when we're approaching that, the payoff is that freedom that you get, that feeling of flow and glide that you get back into your day and into your teams. And some of the biggest words that you've said right now is that what is that code of behavior that you've got with other people? Have you agreed on how we send things? So I mean, norming teams, working with, that's something that we're so concerned about, because it really is essential for having leaders be able to leverage their own potential. And then you were getting it back into the habits, which might be a good time to sort of remind people that we have other videos like this, and we have other programs running, and one of them was Choose Your New Normal, and that was all about setting habits. So if this is a new habit that interests you, then you can look at that for the larger framework about how do we get back into making that a really compelling, enduring choice. Wow, we are right near the end, so I think it's about time that we begin to wrap it up. I want to thank you again, Michael, for taking the time out of your day to put this together. It's a really great program. I can see why so many people have been happy about it while you've delivered it in the past. And, I'm really grateful for you being here, sharing it with us, because I think it's important and it can make a big difference in people's days. The thing is, let's just end off too by making sure that people are aware that we've got the Brain Trust channel where you can find things like this. We have one coming up, hot off the presses here. We're going to be doing capacity a la carte. Somebody in the chat mentioned that they receive some unwanted traffic coming from suppliers and contractors and people pining for work and these kind of things. So when you're forming a team, especially if it's a short-term team, if it's contingent workforce or contractors, how do you get them into your way of working really quickly? How do you perhaps introduce them to how you want your communication to be run and how they should be using their emails? We're going to be covering all of that. Really, it's about how can you get the most value out of contract contingent resources. And this is really important right now, because we are seeing a big change coming at us. We're going to have a wave of attrition that won't have happened before in recent memory. We're going to see teams that are having to change. There's reorgs going on and whatnot. And on top of all of that, we've got initiatives that have been put on the back burner for several years and need to happen now. So, I mean, having the ability as a leader to scale up and scale down your capacity is really important. We're going to go over the leadership chops to do that. So I'd encourage you. That's up on Teamwork Excellence /Brain Trust if you want to find
Who is we,
Michael.
Tim?
Well, we haven't announced it yet, but there's a gent in the room today, Kyle Woolgar from Procom, who's going to be joining me for this conversation. And you'll learn more about Kyle, but he's a great dude. So we're going to have a lot of fun during that one. It might be the two of us. We might add another seat. It's going to be happening on or about the 17th of June coming up. So make sure that you sign up for that. It's going to be a good one. Other than that, Michael, let me leave the final words with you, please.
Yeah, I saw there was a question here and an answer about least favorite in tray, and I just want to put my vote in for voicemail is my least favorite in tray. That's my soapbox, my hill to die on. Other than that, no, just, email is tough. You receive a lot of communication through Zoom and Slack and Trello and all of the personal apps that you use and Instagram. And there's a lot of fear of missing out and FOMO. And so I would encourage you to try to be as FOMO free as possible. Turn down your notifications. Try to figure a way to get your emails handled in a way that you can come back to them. You will fall down. You will not necessarily succeed the first time. And so set aside time to manage that. And you can do this. It'll just take intentional time and effort, and start lightweight. You know, in the procrastination equation, you can't change your impulsivity. Your impulsivity is sort of your natural proclivity towards distraction. So you have to work outside of that, right? And so make sure that your system is working for you, is working the way you need it to work, and is helping you to be successful and helping you to manage your stress and anxiety and your feeling of being in control of your actions, of your responses, of your emotions and your feelings. And then also helping to influence those things with your teams.
That's it. So I would encourage all of you to remember, it's within your power to create high functioning teams, to focus on the work that matters, and to build the capacity for excellence within your organization. And by doing that, you are going to find your leadership groove. You can do this, folks. Thank you so much, Michael Fiss. We're Teamwork Excellence. I'm Tim Sweet. Bye for now.
Thanks, everybody.